Hello, welcome back. Today I will be finishing Chapter 3 of my book, Sparrowmancer. I know this is backwards. Yes, I named my channel after this book. Now, today's video will probably be short because we are almost done with this chapter. And I considered reading on into Chapter 4, but what I would rather do is keep the individual chapters in their own videos, if at all possible. So, I'm going to finish Chapter 3 today, and we will get into Chapter 4 next time. Previously, Sparrow had come to stay with some mech hunters. They were living in a wasteland just outside a destroyed city, and who made their living such as it is, destroying large battle platforms they describe as plats. Now, without further ado, let's finish Chapter 3 of Sparrowmancer. Weeks went by. Sparrow had lived with military people before. Spires was a new experience. There was less rigidity. They were all in their fight together as equals. Jory was at the top of a relaxed hierarchy. She led when she did, not because she gave orders, but because she gave encouragement. Sparrow liked that better than he had liked shouted commands and unyielding authority. He settled in easily. Autumn went down into its last ashes. Sparrow learned the paths of the dead city as he hunted platforms through it. He floated on irregular assignment with a dozen different detachments, and he saw the city from every vantage point. He learned the plats, where to hit them, and how they moved, how to climb them in seconds, what made them spin a certain way, and when they would fire their biggest weapons. He learned their names, and he named some himself. He began to want to see them smoke, burn, and topple apart, tracking them, destroying them, and reaping their power plants began to feel like a purpose. But he never quite got there. He was never quite a reaper. Some fundamental part of him stayed outside what he was doing. Before anything, that was who he was. An abject, a geminate thing, half actor and half observer. As winter came, he began to suspect that something about the platforms had changed. They were anticipating more often. They were more motivated. At the time, there were only 3 in the city. The other regional natives were gone or offline. That was another thing. Plats were leaving the area. It looked like risk assessment. Advanced, predictive behavior they'd never shown before. He told Tob, the ranger he worked with most frequently. At first, he and Tob had worked well together. They had liked each other. But Tob changed too. Sparrow came to think that Tob was getting tired of him. When he told Tob he thought the machines were getting smarter, Tob laughed. "There's nothing to make them smarter, Indworlder," he said. "I don't know what's doing it," said Sparrow, "but it's happening. You haven't seen it?" They were watching for a plat called Big Green, looking down on Bank Street from a bombed-out office in a leaning high-rise. Tob was chewing paper. It was a strange habit, but he wouldn't stop, no matter how often Sparrow told him it wasn't healthy. "You see things that aren't there because you think too much," Tob said, his face blank, "and because you think you're smarter than everyone else." Sparrow thought maybe that was true. He considered it for a few days. Meanwhile, a new kind of platform appeared. It was early winter. The first snow was waiting. Everybody could feel it. Leaves curled off the sparse trees. Dew became frost. The desert was ready to glisten in the cold. Sparrow was scouting with Apple's hunting group, and the day was so cool that his breath was like steam. He saw then for the first time a platform that looked like a person. Its chassis was matte black, with some white symbols painted on its broad chest. Its head was a featureless, vertical oval, and one of its forearms was the barrel of a plasma caster. There was no visible servomusculature to define its naked shape. Instead, its appendages were solid cylinders with hidden joints. Sparrow tracked it down 8th Street and watched it walk into an apartment building on Rutherford Road. It had a steady, gliding gait. When it didn't come out for half an hour, he returned to Apple. 714 Rutherford, he said. "There's a 3-story block beside the aquarium's door." It went in and didn't come out. "Maybe it lives there," Apple said. Sparrow frowned at her. "Are you taking this seriously?" "New plats migrate in," Apple replied. "It's been a while, but it happens. There'll probably be a stream of them. You know they've been getting smarter. Now they're starting to look like us. I think this is something to worry about." "Don't worry," Apple said. "We're going to go get it. Greenhorns always get too serious once they start to feel some experience. You can dial back the hardcore a little, Indy." Sparrow didn't tell Apple that he thought her cavalier attitude was inappropriate. Instead, he considered whether she could be right. She'd been at Spires since before the clips came. She would know better than he would. Apple's team went to Rutherford Road, across a line of rooftops they'd joined with stacks of particle board. Sparrow followed at ground level on his hoverbike. They saw the black chassis standing in the intersection of Rutherford and 8th, turning its blank head, scanning the area. It looked dangerous. Sparrow was afraid to fight it, but that didn't matter. He could leave his fear where it was. He could walk past hindrances he'd made himself. He was older than Apple, and his experience wasn't new, but that didn't matter either. All that mattered was hitting that plat as hard as he could, straight out of the gate. He dismounted, pulled his hoverbike's combat handles, and silenced himself. It was a basic setup, the high-low. The sign was a shot from above. One of the rangers put a cane gun blast right in the middle of the black chassis's chest, smearing the white paint. It staggered and looked up toward its attacker, but it wasn't damaged. As it raised its gun arm, Sparrow attacked. He poured particle fire at the platform and began to advance on it, moving his toes in his shoes to cast a cantrip of luck toward his squad mates. The black chassis fell backward, and the Rangers hit it with everything they had. Smoke and dust whirled up around it. Something burst in the cloud, and the Rangers stopped firing. Sparrow released the firing switch. He dragged his cannon up to meet Apple's Rangers as they climbed down into the intersection. The black chassis was blown open, and there was no room in its remains for a power plant. Everything in it had broken when it had exploded. Its head was dust, pulverized. There was no telling what had been in its sensor module, or what its faceplate had been made of. No scrap, no nothing, said Pope, one of Apple's Rangers. I guess that's your new evolution, Apple said to Sparrow. They made themselves a waste of time and ammo, Sparrow said, staring down at the scattered wreck. That's not it. Another black chassis stepped out of the apartment doorway. There were no white numbers painted on its chest. It had been like a shadow where it was. It raised its arm before anyone could react and shot Pope through the head. Then it shot Apple, and the whole left side of her chest disintegrated. Sparrow lunged in to grab its gun arm, fear now thrashing in his head. His stomach turned, and he felt sick. He screamed against the intense pain in his gut as he tried to push the plat back into the doorway. But it was strong, heavy, and immovable. It pushed him instead, and he fell over his heels. For an instant, Sparrow felt the entire existential weight of his impending cessation. All thought gone, and nothing finished. Annihilation didn't come. Raish put his plasma channeler pistol to the black chassis's head and pulled the trigger. The platform disappeared into the bright muzzle flash. The roar of the report carried it away. There were other shots, but Sparrow couldn't think about them. He focused on getting to his feet and pulling his attention back together. It was a simpler thing than others knew to leave fear behind. He set his huge terror down and let it be where it was. Then he continued forward in his assessment of what was really happening. There had been no doom for him, but Apple and Pope were dead. What mattered now was getting out. "You okay, Sparrow?" asked Raish. "I'm always okay," Sparrow replied. They gathered their corpses and fled. On the way out of the city, Sparrow saw more black chassis watching them. From windows, from parking lots. They would appear and disappear so that he couldn't count them. Wherever they were part of that place. They didn't stand out unless they wanted to. It seemed the city had spawned them itself. Back at Spires, they had a funeral. Jory lit a pair of torches and gave a speech that sounded practiced. An old bit trotted out again. Sparrow conducted the severing ritual, and he tried to make it a little more personal. People cried during it. He felt a lump in his own throat, but tears didn't come. Logic blocked them. Rangers knew they could die on the hunt. Sparrow had liked Apple, but she was gone, and he wasn't. His life was about him. He was the center of all his biggest concerns. Until he was dead too, he had to see to them. After the funeral, Sparrow and the rest of Apple's detachment met with Jory in the bunker. They told her about the new platforms, each relaying their own account before Sparrow. They were all emotional in their own way. When it was Sparrow's turn to speak, he tried to leave feeling out of his report. "They attacked us specifically," he explained. "They set a trap and exploited our weaknesses. Scanning equipment would have detected the other one, but they knew we didn't have any. The black chassis are smart and driven. We don't know what else they know. They could know where we are." "Platforms stay in the cities," Joy said. "We always thought it was because there's no power anywhere else. Plats need to stay connected to a city's grid." "Do you think these black chassis have independent power sources?" "I don't know," Sparrow replied. "But I do know we have a stockpile of power plants." Joy shook her head at the floor. She disagreed with her shoes. "What does that mean?" she asked. Todd came into the bunker then. He jumped down the stairs, one landing at a time, and everyone turned toward him. He was ringing a handbell, and his eyes were wide. They looked red in the LEDs, while shadow fell across him. 2 forward scout teams are back with good reports, he said, out of breath. The clips are coming. And with that, we end chapter 3. We will move on to chapter 4 next time. As always, thank you for watching and listening. I hope that you have a wonderful day or night, wherever you are in the world. And I will see you next time.